Hello everyone and welcome back. We are ready to put the binding on our quilt, so I need to figure out how long my binding strip needs to be. And to figure out that number, I'm going to measure all four sides of my quilt and add those numbers together, and that's going to give me the length that I need. Most width of fabric is between 42 and 44 inches long, but you do need to take into account that you will lose inches when you join your strips together, so make sure you take that into account. I need about 90 inches for this, so I am going to need 3 strips of width of fabric, and that'll give me a little bit extra, but I don't mind. That gives me playroom and wiggle room. And you can keep those scraps for a scrappy binding on a different quilt, or you can just throw them in your scrap bag and use them for a scrappy project. I have quite a few planned, so I'm just going to throw my scraps in my scrap bag and then save them for a future project. I don't throw them out. Some people don't like to keep scraps, and that's entirely up to you. Really, you could post them on a Facebook marketplace or something. There's a lot of people that do like scraps and they're willing to buy them, so if you don't like keeping them, don't throw them in the trash. Give them to someone who would want them, or even sell them. There's a lot of quilters out there who love scraps. Here I have just lined up my binding strips on my cutting mat, making sure that they're lined up nice and straight. I'm just doing it so that I can cut my selvages off and have a nice square end there. Now you want to lay your fabrics right sides together, and I'm laying them perpendicular, and I'm going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. This is just so that I have a guide on where to sew. And then when you open it up, you're going to have a nice continuous strip of binding. You can sew them together one at a time, or just do what I'm doing. I'm going to pin all of my pieces together and take them all to the sewing machine, and that way I can just sew them all at the same time. And I'm not running back and forth from my cutting table to my sewing machine. It just makes it easier for me. And now I'm just going to sew along that diagonal line and removing pins if I need to. And I like to chain stitch wherever I can. It just saves on thread and it goes faster for me. And before I cut, I like to double check to make sure that everything's good, and it is. I'm going to take my ruler and line up my 1/4 inch line on my stitch line and then make my cut. That gives a nice 1/4 inch seam. And then I'm going to take it to the ironing board and fold it all over in half and press it down. And I like to give it a good press. When you get to the join that you made there, the diagonal one, you want to make sure that you press the seams open. This helps reduce bulk. And when you're sewing binding down by hand, which I plan on doing, bulk does make it a lot harder, so I try to reduce bulk wherever I can. And then you just keep going until you have your whole strip ironed in half. Alright, so we are ready to attach it to our quilt top. I am going to start on my side. You can start on the bottom or on one of the sides. It's entirely up to you. But we do want to leave a nice long tail. It'll make joining up the ends a lot easier later on. So I'm going to be starting about there, and then when I get around, I'm going to be stopping about that point too. I like to leave at least 12 inches more if I can. Just, it's easier. And like you can see, I have my tail there. Now I'm going to start sewing this down. I have my walking foot on to make it a little bit easier. These are a lot of layers. And here you want to take special care and make sure that you're doing an accurate 1/4 inch seam. We're going to use that 1/4 inch stitch line later on when we fold the binding over to hand stitch to the back as a guide as to where we need to sew it, just so that it's nice and even all the way around and we don't have it looking all wobbly and wonky. And when I get to the end there, I'm not going to sew off the edge. I want to make sure that I stop at about 1/4 inch. I have my purple thing, or I guess orange thing tool. The end there is 1/4 inch, so I'm going to use that to measure. I usually just eyeball it. After you've done this for a few times, then it works. Then I'm going to turn my quilt so that I can go at an angle off, and then I'm just going to sew off before I fold it over and start sewing down the next side. I'm going to show you how to fold it and do my best to explain it. Okay, to start you want to fold it up so that you have a nice 45-degree angle there, and make sure that that one line is straight where my finger is. And then you want to take the binding and you want to pull it back down on itself like this. You can get tools that make this a lot easier. I plan on getting one. Karen Brown on Just Get It Done Quilts. I'll try to link her website down below. She has a really nice make-it-yourself tool. I like to use clips here just to make sure that it stays in place. I'll show you again from a different angle. It might be a little bit easier to see from this way. Again, I'm folding it up like that at a 45-degree angle there, and then I'm folding it down and making sure that all my corners are nice and even, and then clipping it in place just to hold it till I get to the sewing machine and sew it down. Once you've done this a few times, you don't even have to go to your table or anything like that. I just do it straight up at my machine. And then we're just going to start sewing this down, and again, when you get to the end, don't go all the way off the edge. Just repeat these same steps at every single corner until you get to around the last one. And just again, make sure that you're staying at an accurate 1/4 inch seam. It just makes the binding process later on a lot easier, trust me. And once I've reached the end, again, pivot and then sew off. And see here, I'm just doing it by the machine. I've done this a few times now, so it's actually very easy for me. When I first started sewing quilts, I did not want to do binding. It terrified me. But it's actually a lot easier than you think. And then when I got around the last corner, I only sewed a couple of inches because I wanted to leave a nice long tail there. I'm just going to cut away some of this extra length here so that it's not in my way when I'm trying to join my ends together, because we do need to be very careful here. and making sure that we do cut it at the exact measurement we need. So I've cut a 2.5 by 2.5 inch square of fabric because that's how wide my binding is. So I'm going to lay it down on the bottom piece there and making sure that the edge is nice and flush. And then I'm going to lay my top piece over top of all of those layers, and that way I know exactly where I need to cut. So I'm just going to be cutting right along where that square ends. And then if your fabric shifts a little bit, just redo it. Make sure that it's nice because you don't want this to shift and then you're going to cut wrong and then it's not going to work out in the end. So just go slow and make sure it's right the first time. And then we need to open up these ends and we're going to sew them together exactly the same way as we did our binding strips before, with right sides together, laying them perpendicular and then drawing a line from outside corner to outside corner. And this is where I'm definitely going to take the time to pin in place because this is kind of tricky to get it to line up nicely. So I make sure that I pin it in place. And here I'm actually going to kind of fold my quilt up and then clip it. It makes it a little bit easier if you can get the bulk of that out of the way. And you want to make sure that you're putting your fabrics right sides together. It can be very easy to get them twisted or turned around here. If you had a printed fabric, it would be a lot easier to see it, but I do have a solid, so it's a little bit more difficult. But it does work. Just make sure you're doing it accurately. So I'm just drawing my line here, and then I'm going to pin it in place, and I'm going to head over to the sewing machine and then sew down that line. This will just match all the other joints that we made in the binding, and it'll just look nice and clean. Alright, and before I cut that extra fabric off, I like to double check to make sure that I did it right, because if you need to unstitch it, you want to do that before you cut it. And it looks good. You just want to make sure that it's nice and smooth and even all around, and then you can just take your scissors and cut approximately 1/4 inch, doesn't have to be exact. And here I just finger press it open and then fold it down, head over to the sewing machine and finish sewing along there. And then we've sewn our binding down onto the quilt, and I'm going to fold mine over and hand stitch it. You don't need to iron this, you could just fold it over, but I do like to iron it. I think it looks a little bit crisper if you do. Alright, so I have my needle threaded already. I'm going to tie a knot at the end, and I'm going to do what they call a quilter's knot. Sorry, it's very hard to see. I'm going to try to make it so you can see a little bit better. But you just want to lay the end of your thread, your longest tail, onto the needle, and then wrap it around 3 or 4 times and pinch it between your fingernails and just pull it down all the way to the end, and you'll have a nice tiny little knot there. Yeah, it's not going to show up on camera, but it is a nice knot, and it will hold. You don't need a big knot there. A little tip if you need a guide to where to place your binding, I took a heat erase pen and my ruler and just drew a 1/4 inch line from the edge all the way around. And this way I know exactly where to place the edge of my binding so that I have a nice even look all the way around. And then I'm just going to clip all my binding down all the way around. If I'm doing a large quilt, I will only do sections at a time because it does get too heavy with all the clips on there. But with a small quilt like this, I will clip it all the way around. That way I'm not constantly moving my clips. To get my mitered corners to look a little bit nicer, I like to use a pin just to push the fabric all the way to the edge there. And then that way I can get that miter looking a lot better. And then I will clip it in place and hold it so that it stays that way while I'm sewing. You can see there, it's a nice mitered corner. It's not very good. My thumb's kind of in the way. Sorry about that. I'm going to start my first stitch inside the seam allowance there. That way it'll all get covered by the binding and you won't see any knots or any loose threads. And if you do have any loose threads, just tuck them into the binding. Nobody's going to see them. So I'm going to push my needle right along that line that I drew, or you want to go just a hair above your stitch line, and then grab a tiny little piece of your binding. And then you want to take your needle and find the thread that you just pulled out and line it up exactly with that, and then just go about 1/4 inch apart. And this can be difficult when you have this many layers and you're trying not to go through the front of your quilt. And then just when you're getting into your binding, make sure you don't take too big of a bite, because then your stitches will show even if your thread does match. I should have maybe used a thread that didn't match so well so you could see my stitches a little bit, but I have this thing, my threads just have to match. I don't know why, I don't know, they have to match. And then I'm just going to keep going down, going about 1/4 inch apart or 1/8 of an inch. It all depends on how far apart you want your stitches to be. This one isn't going to get a lot of wash because it's just a wall quilt, so I'm not too concerned about the stitches coming undone or them being too far apart. But I'm going to go all the way to the corner there, and then I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so I'm at the corner here now, and when I come up there, I want to make sure that I grab both pieces of the binding, and then I'm going to go through it twice. It's like an anchoring stitch. That way I have 2 stitches going through all of the pieces of binding. It's a thick layer of fabric to go through, and it can be a little bit difficult to push your needle through. A thimble would really help here. I don't have one. I should really get one because I do hand stitch pretty much all of my binding down, and when you do it on a large quilt, your fingers are pretty sore after. And now that I've reached the end of my thread's too short, Alright, to tie off, I'm going to pull my binding back and then just go in the seam allowance, push my needle about halfway through, wrap my thread end around about 3 or 4 times, and then tie off. I bury my ends, but you don't have to. That's entirely up to you how you want to do that, and cut your thread. Then we're going to start again. Start again, I'm going to hold the binding back again and then push the needle through, and I'm going to start right where I put my last stitch and just push the needle right through there and then keep going the same way all the way around. And yes, I'm constantly double checking because I have done a quilt and then I found stitches in front and I had to unpick it, and that sucks. So just make sure, check while you're going. That way then if you did go through, you can pull the threads out before you get all the way done. Then I forgot to mention, I cut my thread about 2 feet long. It depends how long you want it. It's up to you how long you like your threads when you're working with it. Now I've come to the end here and I'm going to just finish off my last stitches. I do kind of go over a couple of the first ones that I made just to make sure that I did get all of them. And now that I've reached the end here, I'm just going to take a tiny little bite of my quilt. Try to push it underneath the binding if you can, and then just same thing, needle halfway through, wrap your end around 3 or 4 times, and then just use your thumbnail to get that knot all the way to the bottom. And then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to push it into my binding so that I can hide that tail in there, and you can kind of just tug on it and it'll pop the knot in there, and then that way your knot's completely hidden and you won't see it. There's a lot of layers and I am struggling with getting my needle through here. I probably shouldn't have done this all in one sitting. I should have taken breaks in between. My fingers are pretty sore here. But yeah, once you get it into the binding, you just pull it and then kind of tug on it, and then that way you can just cut the threads, and then once you release the binding, the thread tail is just going to be stuck in the binding and nobody's ever going to see that. And there we have it, it's all finished. Sorry, the lighting in my sewing room is just awful. I need to get more lights, but there I'm going to give a little bit of a closer look on how my quilting all looks and my binding. I hope you enjoyed this series. I really did, and thank you so much for watching.